It was a clear night, in which the sky looked like a black curtain studded with twinkling stars, and the breeze carried a light chill that tickled the animals' fur. Inside the big barn at Mr. Jones' farm, the cows, sheep, pigs, horses, chickens, and even the dogs gathered. They sat in disorderly rows, exchanging anxious looks, for they had been summoned by the old pig, Major, to an urgent meeting. On a pile of straw, Major, with his white beard, lay stretched out, staring with his sunken eyes at the crowded assembly. He was known among them for his wisdom, for he had lived a long life and had seen enough to know the injustice and greed of humans. When the place quieted down, he lifted his head and began speaking in a trembling but strong voice. "My friends, I will soon depart. But before that, I want to share with you a truth I have realized from my long life. Our whole lives are misery and slavery. We work day and night. Humans squeeze us as they squeeze oranges. Then, when we grow old or fall ill, they slaughter us without mercy." Eyes widened in horror and sorrow. The cows retreated a little, and the dogs bowed their heads. Then Major continued, saying, "The reason for all our misery is nothing but a single enemy, man. He is the one who takes all our production and leaves us with crumbs. If we got rid of him, the earth's bounty would be ours alone." Excited murmurs spread among the animals. Major's words were awakening something buried deep in their hearts. Major sighed before continuing. "Last night I dreamed a strange dream. A dream of a free farm, ruled by no human, where animals live as brothers, eat in contentment, work for themselves, and live and die with dignity." Then his voice rose with some enthusiasm. "But for this dream to come true, you must unite together. Be brothers. Never allow seeds of enmity to grow among you, for all animals are equal." After that, he taught them a song he had heard in his dream called "Beasts of England," a song that spoke of a day that would come when animals would be free, and the harvests of the fields and the waters of the rivers would be theirs alone. The animals began to chant the anthem with him at first cautiously, then their voices rose until they shook the corners of the barn. They sang and sang until their hearts trembled from the intensity of hope. Suddenly, the singing was cut off by the sound of heavy footsteps outside. Mr. Jones had awakened, roused by the noise, and fired a shot into the air from his rifle. The animals threw themselves down, terrified, and each returned to its place in the barn. Darkness prevailed again, and silence enveloped the place. But deep inside them, a new spark remained ignited, a spark of a dream that would never have been born were it not for that night. This entire chapter revolves around Major's meeting with the animals to plant in their hearts a new idea that the misery they live in is not an inevitable fate, but the result of oppression and aggression from a single party, man. Here, George Orwell presents the essence of revolutions. They always begin with a person or an idea that awakens the oppressed. This person or idea reveals to them that the cause of their suffering is not nature or destiny, but rather clear injustice that can be changed. Major in the novel is a symbolic image of Karl Marx or Lenin. That is, the thinker who lays down the revolutionary theory and stirs the feelings of the exploited classes. Notice how the animals gathered in awe and curiosity. The cows, sheep, horses, chickens, and even the dogs, all of them represent the poor classes of society who live to work, eating only what barely keeps them alive. They did not, until that night, have a clear awareness that there was systematic injustice. They considered what they were living simply as the natural way of life. When Major began revealing the truth to them, whispers and excitement rose, which shows us the fragility of collective consciousness and how easily it is influenced by emotional words. Then comes the song that Major taught them. This song is more than just words. It is a symbol of collective hope, an anthem that unites them and makes them feel they are together in a cause greater than themselves. Notice in history how almost every revolution had an anthem or slogan. The French Revolution, La Marseillaise. The Russian Revolution, the Internationale. Because anthems draw minds into an emotional state in which the dream becomes collective, larger than the individual self. Although the speech is beautiful and passionate, Orwell subtly plants disturbing signals. The animals received the idea with emotional rapture, without discussing it rationally or planning realistically. All they had was a beautiful promise and the sound of a song, without any guarantees. This is a profound observation about how revolutions usually begin with rosy hopes before later colliding with the reality of power, greed, and internal conflicts. The symbolic summary of this chapter is that Major and his speech represent the revolutionary thinker who awakens consciousness. The animal suffering embodies the exploitation of the working classes. The anthem, Beasts of England, is a symbol of the unifying ideology, and their fear of Jones's gun is a reminder that real power still lies in the hands of the exploiters. Orwell, with brilliance, wanted us to ponder, why do the hearts of the masses so quickly tremble at merely a beautiful dream? And is just a dream and a song enough to change a solid reality governed by force and weapons? Major, in George Orwell's Animal Farm, plays the role of the first ideological instigator. His primary function is to make the animals aware of their oppression and incite them to rebel, and he represents the beginning of the formation of a collective consciousness among them. Symbolically, Major embodies the revolutionary thinker or theorist, and he is often compared to Karl Marx, who laid down the communist theory, and sometimes is seen as a shadow of Lenin, who led political awareness before the Russian Revolution. But in any case, he is not the practical leader of the revolution. Rather, he is the owner of the idea that sets events into motion. Major's presence in the text is short in time. He appears at the beginning of the novel to plant the initial concepts about the injustice of man and to identify the enemy. Then he quickly disappears through his death to show that the real story is not his story, but the story of the idea he launched and what will happen to it afterward. His speech relies mainly on stirring the emotions of the animals by highlighting their daily suffering without offering a systematic plan or a clear economic or political model. All his focus is on clarifying that the cause of their suffering is not fate, but the injustice of man, and that they deserve a better life. However, he does not put forward practical mechanisms to protect his project or ensure the realization of this dream without later deviation, and this is a crucial point, because in this form, his ideas will remain vulnerable to exploitation and distortion after him. Orwell's choice of making him a pig carries a precise meaning in the context. The reader will later see that the pigs will become the new ruling class on the farm. Major was the first pig to embody awareness and culture and to plant the idea. Then other pigs will come to employ the same idea in building a new repressive regime. This makes Major, within the structure of the dramatic conflict, play the role of the intellectual spark from which all the events will start. He does not enter the power struggle later on, nor does he live to see what his ideas will lead to. His function is to begin the tale, then disappear, so that the novel later reveals how even revolutionary ideas, no matter how honest and noble they were at their start, can turn in the hands of new players into tools for new oppression. In this way, Major represents in the novel the initial revolutionary consciousness that reveals to the oppressed the cause of their suffering and motivates them to change, without establishing practical foundations that would protect the project, thereby leaving the door open to those who will later exploit this awareness for their own interests. And this sums up his realistic value within the novel: to intellectually move the beginning, then disappear, leaving the idea alone to face the test of reality and power.
The scene of the animals gathering around Major in the first chapter of Animal Farm clearly reveals the psychological and social nature of oppressed masses when their awareness begins to form. The animals here represent the exploited working classes in any society. They live a tiring, monotonous life in which they toil without truly thinking about the reasons for their suffering, because injustice for them has become familiar, almost like the very nature of life. Their gathering that evening around Major was not driven by any prior intellectual awareness, but rather by an instinctive curiosity when they heard that something important would be said. This shows that the initial readiness to hear the idea of rebellion often does not come from a firm understanding of injustice, but from a kind of spontaneity that may be stirred simply by curiosity or respect for the speaker's reputation. When Major began his speech and laid out the details of their daily suffering, placing the blame on man, we notice that the animals did not oppose him or demand critical clarifications. Instead, they quickly surrendered to what he said, reacting emotionally as soon as they heard a simple explanation linking their suffering to a clear external enemy. This behavior reflects the audience's receptivity to a simplistic discourse that directs anger toward a specific target without much intellectual resistance, especially if the audience is already under long-standing suffering. Then, when it came time to sing the song Beasts of England, the scene became even more telling. The song was not merely an entertainment segment, it was a psychological mechanism to create a unified collective feeling. The animals chanted the anthem with evident enthusiasm, entering into a shared emotional state that made them feel they were all part of one cause. This highlights a well-known mechanism in mass movements. Songs and slogans establish emotional cohesion much faster than any logical speech or economic statements. But this scene nonetheless exposes major gaps. The animals became excited by the song and the speech without raising any questions about practical details. No one discussed how they would confront Mr. Jones if he resisted, or what would guarantee them a future free of exploitation after overthrowing the humans. This absence of critical thinking or realistic organization reveals the fragility of their new awareness and later lays the foundation for the revolution's deviation. Orwell portrays the scene with a cold realism to say that even if the masses suddenly gain awareness of their oppression, this awareness often begins fragile, emotional, and easily directed, and does not automatically transform into organized awareness or calculated resistance. Thus, this scene simply sums up the mechanism of the emergence of collective awareness under the weight of exploitation, and how collective emotion can quickly swell upon receiving an inciting speech and a unifying song, yet is usually empty of any real questions about what comes next. This weakness in realistic thinking among the masses at the first moment of awareness is precisely what will later allow new leaders to steer the revolution toward their own interests.
If we look at history, we find that the beginnings of most revolutions are very similar to what happened in this chapter. In the French Revolution, for example, peasants and city workers lived for decades under burdensome taxes, famines, and a poor distribution of wealth, yet they still accepted or coexisted with their reality for a long time as if it were a natural system. What changed things was not the revelation of new facts, but the arrival of Enlightenment ideas and slogans that put the enemy in a clear image: the nobles, the king, and the church, who were draining the wealth of the people. Here, defining the adversary gave popular anger a direction, exactly as happened when Major showed the animals that man was the root of all their suffering. In Tsarist Russia, before the Bolshevik Revolution, peasants and workers suffered enormous economic exploitation and senseless wars, but no real project for change crystallized until Lenin's speeches and the Internationale anthem appeared, which turned their fragmentation into a unified bloc against the Tsar and the bourgeoisie. The masses there also initially rushed behind the general idea and slogans without clear details on how to manage the economy or power after toppling the regime. This is what later paved the way for the rise of the Bolshevik Party with all its authoritarianism. There is also a strong similarity in the immediate use of anthems and slogans in real revolutions. In France, La Marseillaise was not merely a national song, it was a means to stir emotions and link individuals to a larger group. In Russia, the Internationale did the same. In the scenario Orwell depicted, the song Beasts of England was the symbolic counterpart, a means to deepen the animals' sense of unity and that they have a shared future worth sacrificing for. This scene also shares with reality a pivotal point, the weakness of critical thinking at the first moment of fervor. In most historical revolutions, the masses who had long been accustomed to accepting their condition suddenly start clapping and shouting behind a new idea without having a practical roadmap, which quickly makes them susceptible to being controlled by more organized forces. Exactly like the pigs will later do in Animal Farm, when they turned that emotional revolution into a new system of exploitation. Overall, the gathering of the animals around Major in the novel, and their uncalculated enthusiasm after an emotional speech and a song, is not some far-off fictional fantasy, but rather a simplified and at the same time precise reformulation of a mechanism that has been repeated in major revolutions. Long suffering regarded as natural, then a simplistic idea that places the cause of misery in a specific adversary, then an anthem or slogan that quickly unites everyone, followed by an emotional rush, often without detailed considerations, explaining why many revolutions later turn into new oppressive regimes once an organized force seizes them.